What's up, everyone? It's Freedom from Songwriting. Yes, this is audio only, but you can download this interview in the description. And make sure you do so because I am talking to Matt Weiss today, who some of you may know from the Pro Audio Files. Matthew is a Grammy-nominated and Spellemon Award-winning audio engineer who has worked with a large variety of artists such as Arrested Development or Dizzy Rascal. I discovered one of his videos years ago while I was learning about music production. That's the Pro Audio Files channel on YouTube. And I thought it was absolutely fantastic, so do check that out. Now let's move into the actual interview. Let's start with your favorite book. How's that?
Well, my favorite book tends to change depending on what I'm reading at the time, but I mean, I'm a Palichello fan, and I like sort of the simple existentialist resolution type stories. I just read one called Veronica Decides to Die, which is it's a dark book. There's no two ways about that, but it's a really good book. Spoiler alert, Veronica tries to kill herself, but you find that out really fast.
She's like an older woman, right? I think I've heard the story before.
No, she's younger.
She isn't.
Yeah, you're all sorts of wrong already. Congrats.
Okay, well, that's a good start.
It's okay.
Well, that's great.
I'll catch up. Trust me.
Yeah. Well, by the time I read it, she might be old already. Anyways, any nonfiction books maybe that maybe our subscribers might be interested in, like something in terms of mixing or something. Are there any books out there that you feel like capture the essence of mixing or gave you some stuff that you didn't know before?
I haven't read a lot of good books about mixing. I thought Mike Stavrow's Mixing with Your Mind was pretty good because it was a little bit more philosophical. But I find that most books on mixing, it's kind of the phrase dancing about architecture comes to mind pretty fast.
Yeah, Frank Zappa.
And even when I'm writing my own stuff about mixing, I have that in the back of my mind all the time. Like, people are reading words on a page. What does this have to do with listening to music? Nothing. Oh, God.
Yeah.
And I try and make it the best I can and just aim to, like, okay, can I get people to listen to some things? Because that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, that's the great thing I find about YouTube, that you're really able to just show what you're doing and just, having the live channel on and being able to like write or show what you're actually doing inside the software. I find really helps.
Absolutely. I mean, it's such a more you really do need to hear what's happening in order to really lock it in. Of course, the other side of it is that I do sort of subscribe to that old school theory that reading is a more active form of engaged learning, but they're not mutually exclusive. You can write and do YouTube videos as I do and as you do. So, you can get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, definitely. So while we're at it, any YouTube channels that you really like?
I mean, if I say holistic songwriting, do I get credit, or is that like, is that too? I do like your channel a lot. Yeah, I watch a lot of non-music stuff because working in
Same here.
Right. So I like Philip DeFranco a lot. I like the Doug Polk poker channel a lot. Basically, things that kind of get my mind away from my business stuff. But I like the way that they deliver.
Cool. Yeah, I have the same thing about board games, actually. Like, that's my biggest hobby outside of music, which is like kind of the thing that I watch on YouTube pretty much.
Oh, nice. You watch Felicia Day's channel? What's it, where they get...
The Geek and Sundry?
Yeah, and they get all the different like pseudo-celebrities to kind of come in and play board games with each other.
Yeah, that's the one I started with.
Yeah.
And I've moved to this other one, this British one, Shut Up and Sit Down, which I think is hilarious. They're really good at that kind of stuff.
Oh, that one's new to me. I'll get the link from you.
So, as you know, maybe from watching my YouTube videos, I'm really interested when it comes to songwriting. I'm more really interested in the mindset than the actual practices, maybe, because I'm really interested in what the goal is of songwriters. Like, what are they thinking about as they write their music? What's the direction behind their artistic decisions, basically. Which is why I'm asking this next question, which is, what do you first listen to in songs? So when a song comes up on the radio or when someone plays your record for the first time, what's the first thing that your mind is drawn to? Is it the production? Is it a certain sound? Is it the writing itself? Or is it, what are you first listening to?
Well, to answer that question literally, the first thing I'm listening to is the intro.
Great answer. Yeah.
People say, what's the most important part of the song? Oh, it's the chorus. I say, nah, I'm pretty sure it's the intro. That's the 10 seconds that somebody's going to decide whether or not they're clicking to the next station if they haven't heard your song.
Yep.
I actually try to just allow the song to hit me without listening actively to anything, because I have this terrible habit, and I think anybody in the music production world will do this, where, as a mixing engineer, primarily a mixing engineer, the first thing I'm listening to is the mix, and it takes me out of the song sometimes. Working in music kind of can ruin music for you. And by you, I mean me. But I would say, I mean, really, like intrinsically, I think the thing that almost always hits me first is either the mood or the groove.
Mm.
And if that groove is there, I like, I've said this before, like I became a Britney Spears fan against my will. It's like, damn it, Toxic is so catchy and the groove is there and
Yep.
she's so cornball, but I still like it.
Yeah. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I so know what you mean. And it's funny. Like being a songwriting teacher, I got a lot of productions from people, and it's really hard sometimes to like listen past the production and just listen to the song. I find that as well, even though really my main focus is the songwriting and production comes second to me. It is really hard, I think, for anyone to listen to anything besides the sound first. So I think it's something you really have to train yourself to do.
But I think that at the same time, there's also a heart to the song, and I always, when I'm producing, I always do the vocal plus instrument test, which is if the song is really working, then you should be able to grab an acoustic guitar, sit down at the piano, and hammer out the progression of the song, and have the vocalist sing the top line, and it should still be really compelling. And if it isn't, then at the beating heart of it, all you're going to have is a great production, and great production can go to a certain degree, but I think especially and now where even entry level production shops are generally better than where they were at 15 years ago at like the top end. I would say, it's too competitive to just rely on production alone. That said, the production is extremely important. So it's like if it's poorly produced, then you have a great song that's not going to hit the listener right.
Yeah, exactly. I feel 70% of pop music is really the production, if not more, maybe. Which is why so many songwriters, why so many producers are now writing their own songs, I think.
I'm gonna cut you off because I was just talking to a friend of mine, a guy named Ant. He's doing Jeremiah's album. He wrote like 80 songs with the guy in New Orleans just like 2 weeks ago. It was insane. He writes with all sorts of amazing people and was just in the studio with Guetta. And it, he's singing the song he wrote to me, and the thing was like, it was like 5 words was the entire song, and I'm looking at it and I'm like, so you spend like 20 years writing novels worth of brilliant lyrics only to get paid the most you ever got paid to write the most simple lyrics in the universe, and that is the reality of pop music. But you have to get to that point to then make those 5 words actually sell, and it's strange, but that's why we always listen to these songs and we go, well, that's blindingly simple.
Yeah.
But don't second guess it. The people who wrote those lyrics are still probably totally brilliant.
Yeah. I always compare it to designing. Like I'm thinking, like a lot of people are comparing that pop music is too simple, but no one is complaining about the Apple logo,
Right.
which is just the essence of design. It is so simple you couldn't take anything away, and it would be like then it would be destroyed essentially. And that is how I feel about pop music as well. It is as simple as it possibly can be, and which is why it's appealing to so many people, I think, as well.
Yeah, I mean, and there's actually that's very challenging to do. I think people don't really give it credit to where credit is due. It's really a lot of times harder to be simple than it is to be complicated. It's easier. You probably know this. It's easier to write a down-tempo ballad than it is to write a dance song.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's really difficult. I get some emails from people that are just asking me, like, how can I sound happier? Everything I write sounds sad and it sounds depressing. And that is the hardest thing to do. And I mean, there's some tricks to it, like using higher velocities in your samples and stuff like that, so it doesn't sound so softly played. Like, you need to play everything with vigor. And if you play it on, like, play something live, if you sing something, you have to, like, perform it as if your life depended on it. Like you have to put a lot of energy into it as well. Otherwise, you won't hear that on the record, or it will sound down low. That like the energy will not come across.
Well, it has to be everything, and because it's in the mixing. Mixing can influence the if the intention of a song is to be sad, then when I'm choosing my reverbs and things like that, and my tones and stuff like that, I'm going to be working toward that goal, and no one thing is going to get there. And if it's supposed to be happy, it might be the opposite. I might be making different choices to get toward that goal, and so every little decision goes toward that goal, which is why music encapsulates emotions and feelings that can't simply be expressed in spoken words. And one of the things that I love about your channel and why I watch it as an engineer is because you talk about the emotional affect. A simple example was when you were comparing like Taylor Swift to The Weeknd, and just noting that all of Taylor Swift's melodies tend to revolve around the tonic, as opposed to The Weeknd's melodies, which tend to revolve around the fifth and fourth. One
Yep.
has this very comfortable sound. It's very welcoming. It's very, it reminds us of our lullabies and our ABCs and things like that. Childhood
Warm, very
songs.
neutral. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then with The Weeknd, when he's in more minor keys more often, and also between fifths and fourths, there's more tension inherently in that. And so it creates it works toward a feeling of despondency, which is then also integrated into every step of the production as well. So it's everything. It's always everything. So if somebody wants to write and be happier, then they need to create a happier mindset and work toward that goal at every step.
Right, exactly. Which brings us back to the mindset, which I always think the message is the most important thing. What do you want to say as an artist, and then everything else should kind of follow from that. I think if you're feeling depressed in your life right now, it's really hard to write a happy pop song. I've known people who have done that very successfully, but I always find it's definitely more of a challenge. Like if you know how to like the tricks of the trade, then it gets a little bit easier. But yeah, it's always easier to write the songs like songs that sound like how you feel.
Yeah. I mean, and sometimes, yeah, there are people who are really depressed who write very happy songs, but the reason they're writing happy songs is it's because it's the only thing that they're holding on to fight the depression that they have. Or vice versa. There's a French word, and I don't remember what it is off the top, but it translates to the pull toward the void, where it's the sudden feeling of a suicidal tendency, which apparently, from what I read, and I don't know this at all, is actually a sign of happiness, that happy people will experience this. It's a means of sort of grounding oneself. So there can be contrast, and that tends to provide for very textured music.
You mentioned briefly that you always start with, or you at least go through like a sort of test if the song goes without the production, like if the songwriting is good enough to stand on its own. For example, I have a couple of songs where I'm thinking like I don't see these kind of songs working just on a piano. Something maybe like "Let's Get This Party Started" by Pink, which is, or like a lot of funk songs. I mean, feel like it's really so much about the groove. Like those are kind of songs where I feel like the production really is such a big part of it. Or Blurred Lines or a song like that. I feel like those songs are really production songs. Wouldn't you say so?
I think that you're right about that. I'm not really a master of understanding all facets of music because it's sort of an endless thing. And so, yeah, there are definitely songs where it's really hard to picture somebody sitting down and hammering it out on a piano, thinking like, bird lines, chord, or whatever. But here's the funny thing, somebody probably did that. At some point, I mean, that song was probably started on a guitar, I would think, just, doing like some chinking or something like that, and started humming it along, like, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's super fascinating. Also, how this kind of stuff is perceived across the world. I find it really fascinating because right now I have someone translating the addiction formula for me, and so he's translating it into Spanish, and I find that really interesting because the Spanish music market is so different than the American one. I mean, even the German one is super different as well, but the Spanish one is different because it's so based on groove. Everything, like the Latin American music market especially, is so based on groove that all the formulas in the addiction formula almost don't really apply anymore, because so much of the addiction formula is centered around like writing those 3.5 minute songs. They have a really clear chorus, really clear verse. It's really clear where you are in the song. There's always like a map that points you towards, with that big arrow that says you are here. Whereas a lot of like that Southern American music is so centered around groove, and it doesn't really go anywhere. Like the energy isn't really changing throughout the song. It's just one thing that kind of loops, and with different kind of performers singing over it. And yeah, it's something I'm trying to wrap my head around, why that stuff still works. I feel maybe groove is an alternative to strong structure or something like that, but I'm still trying to figure out why that works.
Well, that's the mystery again, where it's like the ideas of like, I think people get it confused that you can sort of let structure go to the wind because you can find a million examples of songs that really have no innate structure, musically speaking, and they're still humongously successful and really catchy songs. But my feeling is that you can take the structure as a means of describing the music you're hearing rather than a means of prescribing the music you're making. So if you can come up with, 4 bars or 8 bars that can literally cycle through, and your whole record is just A to A to A to A to A for 4 minutes or whatever it might be, and it works, by all means, rock on. In certain styles, things where people
Hip hop.
are, yeah, hip hop, where it's almost meant to kind of be something that lulls the listener into the vocal performance, then I think that it works fine. And that tends to play out pretty well in like dance clubs and things like that. But
Yeah.
it really depends on where your audience is going to be and what you're trying to do. Like, it's a whole world of music when you have a specific idea for where it's going to be played.
Yeah, very true. And also hip hop obviously has a history of like coming from samples, so it is based on those loop on that loop idea. It wasn't music that was made by musicians originally. And so kind of that has become accepted in that culture.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you think about the original side of that, is that the idea was that there would be a section of the song where the I mean, really, originally it was where the instrumentalists played out solo and the vocalist took a break, and it was called the break. And that would get looped up because that's the part that that breakdown sort of gave something that people wanted to dance to. So the DJ would loop it back and loop it back and loop it back. They would use 2 records to do it, so that they would cue one, play the other, loop it back. While the other one's playing, they cue it, they'd slide over the mixer, and they would just keep going back and forth so that this break would play out longer so that people could really get down to it. And then people started realizing, well, wait, if we just take everybody's favorite part of the song and we just loop that up for 3 minutes, we could make a whole new song out of that, and everybody will love it because it's the best part of the song just playing again and again. And there was some truth to that, and it worked.
So we've briefly talked about it, but I want to know how you work. What is your process? What is the most difficult part of your work for you? And are there things that you outsource? Are there certain things that other people do for you, like maybe the editing or something like that? Or do you do everything yourself? Or
I have an assistant. Yeah, I don't do everything myself. I did that for years, and that's why I'm crazy now.
yeah,
Yeah, the very first thing that I do when I'm starting on a mix or starting a project is I complain to my assistant for about 20 minutes about everything that's wrong. And then I ask her to fix up.
cleansing.
Right, exactly. And then I ask her to fix up the stuff that is going to ruin my ability to experience the record. So that'll be things like, poorly edited or not edited stuff, pitch correction, bringing a little bit of life to the arrangement if it feels like it's missing something, getting the sessions set up, like all the boring stuff that I don't really want to do, so that when I listen to the music, I can kind of just like feel it through and not have anything, take me out of it. And then anything that would take me out of it, that's what I start fixing. So my process really is to just get it to a point where once I push the faders up, then even if I do nothing at all, it still sounds good and sounds enjoyable. And then I can work from there, and I can try and, start really feeling out what the production is intending to do, what the songwriters were trying to make happen, like what kind of feelings I'm getting from it, and then do everything I can using sonics as my medium to get it there.
Yeah. Yeah, one thing I found really interesting, because we have, mutual friends, Linnea, who also produced my audiobook for the Addiction Formula. And she said she joined you in the studio, and she was really amazed by how most of your work seemed to, or at least in the early stages, seemed to revolve around EQing tracks. And she was really amazed by that. How I think a lot of, not that Linnea is a beginner by all means, but there's a lot of beginning producers who tend to think that producing is a lot about, or mixing is a lot about applying effects and having a lot of plugins in your chain, and a lot of it really is just cleaning up what's already there. Could you maybe talk about that for a second?
Well, if the producers have really locked in a great sound, and it also depends on the genre, because producer can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But if they've locked in their sound, then my job is to make sure that just whatever that is going to translate the best that it can. So the very first thing that I'm doing, actually, I really try and just say, okay, can I just turn this up and do nothing to it, and it works? And hopefully the answer to that will be yes, at least a few times. If the answer is no, then I have to sort of start thinking why. And usually it's because of something that's in the physical reality of the sound or the way that the sounds are merging together. And that's almost always an equalization thing. With live sounds, there's just the reality that when you have a microphone, it's going to impart a sound. When a sound is in a room, it's going to impart a sound. And a lot of the times we want that sound, but some of the times we don't, or we want to just modify it slightly. So it's sort of just contouring the things into, okay, the producer got 90% of the sound correct. Can I just kind of tweak it a little bit, that last 10%? So it's like, okay, this is like if it was the perfect microphone in the perfect room with the perfect capture and the perfect distance. Okay, cool. Now we're good. Let's go.
When you are cueing, are you thinking in terms of spacing and where the microphone is placed, or like do you have that three-dimensional envisioning of things, or what are you seeing in your mind's eye while you are equalizing?
So this is a do as I say, not as I do kind of a thing. But for the longest part of my career, yes, I would have a specific visualization that I would work toward where I would have front to back imaging. I would be thinking about, what kind of air and space the microphone would have and what kind of a capture that would go so that there's this huge dimensional palette. However, after a certain point, that becomes kind of second nature. It's a little bit more ingrained. And what I really am focusing on now is not consciously thinking about anything, but rather unconsciously thinking about things as much as possible, going off of intuition as much as I can, so that even if the sound is kind of like goofy in a weird way, like, okay, 9 out of 10 elements are all right in the front of the speaker, the front to back image, but it still feels good, then I want to be able to say this is the mix. And or likewise, if everything's like way in the back, it's like there's a whole, everything's slushed out and warbly and overlapping and stuff, but it works. Then I want to be able to say, okay, this is the mix because it feels right, which is not a technical thing at all.
And are you a booster or a cut guy kind of guy?
I mean, it depends. What drugs are we talking about? I mean, that's one of the weirdest things that started floating around the internet. Here's my feeling. It's good to use an equalizer subtractively, not because it sounds better, but because it forces you to think about how the sound should sound. Taking something away to make it sound better is a much more honest approach than boosting something to make it sound better, because everything sounds better when it's getting pumped up. But that said, in terms of the actual technical side of what an equalizer does, the phase change is exactly the same between whether or not you cut or you boost, unless the EQ is doing something that would otherwise change that. So for example, the Renaissance equalizer by Waves does not have the same proportionate phase change when you cut or boost, but the Waves Q10 does. So that means that if I were to take a band in the Waves Q10 and boost it by 100 decibels, and take the exact same band with the exact same width and cut by 100 decibels in the same frequency corner, then it would neutralize and there would actually be no phase change over the signal at all. I mean, it's unrealistic. The signal would distort, but I mean, the phase change would exactly counterbalance. And the reason being is that in an equalizer, whether you're boosting or cutting, if you created the same EQ shape, you're just doing exactly the same thing. There is no sonic difference.
Moving away from this a little bit, maybe you mentioned your assistant, and I was wondering what are maybe three things I should do if I want to fail in the music business. So in other words, what are some things you've noticed about maybe interns or your assistants or other songwriters or producers you've worked with that really made you not want to work with them again, both in terms of the musicality and in terms of personal things?
So it's hard for me to say how to fail, but I would say I can say what makes people succeed and then see from that what's not going to make, because I did try out a few different interns and assistants. I'm actually still looking for interns. It's harder to find interns than assistants because you pay an assistant. But you know, somebody who is successful in the music industry finds not only the bar that they're supposed to meet, but also finds a way to exceed it. Right? If you find the bar that you're supposed to meet, that's how you keep the job that you're at. That's how you tread water. If you exceed it, that's how you move forward. So when I'm looking at somebody that I think has potential, I'm looking for somebody who's going to exceed the expectation, not simply live up to it. Most people, however, don't even live up to it. The living up to it means, taking understanding the competitiveness that is the music business and realizing that you have to be way on top of it to get it. So like, uh, I had an intern where, well, I didn't even have the intern, but we interviewed. Interview went decently. I said, if I ask you to come in this weekend, is it going to be a problem? A couple days later, I hit him up. I was like, "Hey, I'd like you to come in on Sunday for your first day." And he said, I apologize, but I forgot that I had a family function and I'm not going to be able to make it on Sunday." And I said, "Cool." And then I never spoke to him again because he told me, he said, "I can come in this weekend." And when I asked him, he said, "No, I can't." I don't really care what the reasoning is. Nobody cares what the reasoning is. That's just, you just said no. Cool. Enjoy. I'm sure he's not in the music business anymore. And so that's, as opposed to my assistant now, that was a number of years ago, but she said she had a family function. "I'm sorry, I'm going to be a little bit late. I'm going to try and get there as early as possible." And I said, "Great." And she showed up on time. That's the difference. She got out of her family function because she wants to succeed in the music business.
Yeah, it's really just not meeting the standard, but really going above it. I actually just watched a video on YouTube, which I thought was pretty interesting as well, which kind of spoke to the same thing, which was a guitar teacher kind of doing this video about one of his students saying, "Just once, I would like a student to come in and surprise me. That would be the coolest thing." And to all guitar students out there, or to all students out there, that would be the coolest thing. If you could just like go in and surprise your teacher. That is the greatest thing that you can do to any teacher. Just do it once and it's going to stick. Like, your teacher is going to love you for it for all eternity, essentially. And I feel it's the same in everywhere, but maybe especially in the creative industry, where it really is so important to really push forward and to try new things and to be bold. Yeah. Connected to this, is there any bad advice that you hear often?
I hear so much bad advice, I wouldn't even know where to start. You know what? It's not even the fact that there's bad advice. It's the fact that there's a lot of people who do not have the lived experience that are then touting the advice. So, like, I was on Facebook reading something, somebody said something like, the producer gets songwriting credits and the beat maker doesn't. And I was thinking in my mind, I was like, that's literally the opposite of the case. The person who makes the beat almost always gets songwriting credits, and the person who is the producer, at least traditionally, doesn't. And this is years of being in the music. Like, this is not me being hypothetical. This is I live this every single day. Like, I look at contracts, I see who gets credited and how and why, and it's very surprising to me that people will go on and say things as if they have some understanding of how it works when they have in fact never done it themselves once. That's shocking. But that's the majority of the internet.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, I found a couple of YouTube videos where I got really angry watching it because I was thinking like, you're teaching the wrong, like, it's really wrong what you're teaching here. Like, I've talked about this before.
Was it the one with the microphone where the guy's micing the person from above and he says, "You do this so it gets the vocalist to look up at the mic and create, which helps them retain their pitch," or something like that. I was like, that is such horrible advice. You're going to ruin somebody's voice that way. That's literally the opposite. You want to have a relaxed neck posture when you're singing.
That's horrible. No, it was the one about writing bass lines, and it was something like 7 bass line hacks or something like that. I don't want to diss the channel. I don't even remember which channel it was.
Just diss the channel.
And
fuck these people.
And it was really bad. It was just like they started off with a fairly okay bass line was just like whole notes, and I was like, yeah, that's totally would work in a song. It's super simple, but that's usually what works in songs, just to have whole notes for the bass. And then they step by step changed it, and it was this free jazz kind of bass that jumped all over the place, and it was just the most ridiculous thing, with a lot of like these approach notes and stuff like that, where I'm like, oh yeah, Bach can do that, but we're talking about pop music here and electronic music, and it just doesn't work anymore.
But you know what though? I'm guilty too, because I have a video that's out on YouTube where I'm explaining how a means of constructing an EDM style kick. And when I was doing it, I was really happy with the results, and I just went in, sent it to Dan without even really like checking myself. And then the next day I listened to it and I was like, this kick drum sounds terrible. And I'm getting roasted in the comments. And I'm like, and I thought about it. I talked to Dan. I was like, should I take this down? And he was like, well, it's getting a lot of views. And I was like, yeah, but I mean, I really screwed the pooch here. This is pretty bad kick drum. I was like, you know what? I just got to own my mistakes and I'm not going to erase history. Yep, I did that. So it's still out there if you want to hear me construct a terrible kick drum. But the advice that I was giving was actually good advice. I was just implementing it really badly. Yeah. So, it's one of those things where maybe this guy's got this totally goofy, nonsensical bass line that doesn't make sense, but maybe somewhere in there's like, oh, sure, you can throw in a neighboring or a passing tone as a ghost note pickup. Yeah. Like, that's a nice thing. Like, instead of boom, boom.
Exactly. And that is very much the case. Like, a lot of the things that he said were actually right, but just the result just sounded really off. It just really wasn't right. Yeah, but it's so funny that you mentioned that. Yeah, I have that too, and I find it helps me as a creative person as well. Like when I'm creating YouTube videos, when I make a video that turns out not to be so great, it like really pushes me to the in the future, because my comment section will let me know if I screwed up, and that will make sure that in the future that doesn't happen again.
Well, I mean, it's just reality, which is like, okay, if you were to ballpark guess how many songs in your, let's just say career, because if I said life, it would be way too obscene, but just in your career, would you say that you've written? Total. Not published, written.
Written, maybe 400 to 500.
Okay. And of those, how many of them were not that good?
Oh, 399.
Okay. That sounds pretty accurate, and I'd say you're ahead of the curve. The fact is that, like, the implementation of all of the advice that we give out is really the difference between whether or not it works. Bad advice, the problem with bad advice is that even if you implement it correctly, you still get bad results. That's the difference.
Yeah, very true. I read the story once, because I used to do card magic, and I read the story, which I thought was really funny, of a student of card magic approaching this, I forgot who it was, like Di Vernon or one of these really, huge guitar magicians. And he said, how many tricks do you know? I know about 1,000. And Di Vernon said, I think I know about 2, which I thought, like, at the time, I was like, oh, yeah. That is so true. The master is, masters 1 or 2 things in his life, and the student always tries to do too many things, usually.
Right. Also, that Shin Lim dude is awesome.
Yeah, he's really crazy. Absolutely insane what that guy does. Absolutely. Yeah, there's a couple of really crazy ones. Panta the Smith is someone that you should check out. He has a DVD about coin magic. I forgot what it's called, but it's insane. Like, it's the craziest thing I've ever seen. And I bought the DVD because I wanted to know how to do it, because I wanted to do it myself. And I was even more amazed because the method that he uses is so over the top. It is so insanely hard to do that I would never in a million years try to learn any of that stuff.
Well, that's my theory on that kind of stuff. I'm going to tie it back into music too, which is going to be awesome. Great. But when I watch
holistic,
right, when I watch the magicians do incredible things, a lot of times I couldn't figure out how the tricks were being done. And I like to solve puzzles. I love to do that. So it really drives me crazy when I can't figure out how something's being done. And because subconsciously in my mind, there was something saying that there's a trick to it. And what I wasn't saying was that there's a skill to it, right? So once I started thinking, well, wait, maybe this person is just really, really good. Maybe they've been practicing something so long that they can do something that's incredible without seeming like they move. And so a very easy example of that is if you see somebody vanish a coin in one hand, you look at that and you go, how can somebody possibly make a coin disappear? They hold their hand out. So it's no sleeve, no nothing. They make the coin disappear in one hand, and you're like, where could it have possibly gone? And what you realize is that they've gotten it so that the reflex muscles in their hands are so strong and so accurate that they can actually fire the coin into their other hand down the length of their forearm out of your view so fast and so accurately that you don't even see it happen. And it takes a decade to do that, but it's just that incredible skill that allows it to happen. Going back into music, when you hear an amazing song, a lot of the times it's not a production technique. It's not a trick. It's not a piece of advice that made the difference. It's a long time of just practicing really, really, really hard to be able to get those muscles, mental muscles or physical muscles, to be able to do those things. And there really is no advice or one thing that can give you that. All that it can do is help you down that path.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the biggest things I found when I practiced card magic myself was that in the beginning I had really big challenges with people that wanted to know how the trick is done, and then had this realization for myself that really changed everything for me. And at that point, it started to become, it seemed more like magic. And the realization was that if I'm presenting it as a trick, if I'm presenting it as a skill in that way, then people will be really nervous. And if I'm nervous, especially as a performer, people will get nervous too, and they'll start looking for things. Whereas when I relax and I relax my body language, and this is probably the biggest thing I learned out of card magic, is to be able to control my body language a little bit more. When I'm able to relax myself and just, breathe normally, then it really helps with the trick because people relax as well. And that's when magic really can happen. And I think that's the same in music as well. There's a lot of writers, a lot of songs that I'm being sent where people try to do too much, and it feels like they're trying really, really hard to write this really amazing song. Whereas I think some of the greatest songs that have ever been written, and usually the songs that are in the charts, fall into this category as well, feel effortless, And that's why so many people, I think, critique them as well, because they feel lazy. But there's a lot of hard work going into that. It's a lot of work to make it feel effortless. It's a lot of work to make it feel natural and second nature to the performer.
Well, yeah, I think that's why people dog on music theory sometimes, because then they hear people who think music theory as they write, where, if your reaction to your song is, check out how I implemented this augmented 9 chord. It's like, well, if that's the best thing about your song, then your song probably sucks. Like,
Yeah.
like your response should be like, listen to how this moment with the bass just pulls on your heartstrings, or like the lift of that chorus just goes so far. Like, it should be what you should be bragging about in your song is the emotional impact that it's having, not the statistical transcendental equation that was used to formulate the trigonometric whatever, and then you added 4/4 to 7/8 to 16 24th notes and some crazy ass shit, and you got back to 4/4, and you're so proud of yourself. No one cares. No one cares. The only people,
That's the sad truth. Yeah.
if they did care, then they'd be musicians too.
Yep. Yeah, that's really musicians' music. It really is. It's when you're just writing music for your peers to just impress someone. And that's usually not a good sign. So we've talked about poker playing earlier. We talked about card magic. We talked about a bunch of things outside of music.
Did we talk about poker playing?
Well, you said you watched a couple of YouTube channels
Oh,
about poker playing.
yeah, Doug Polk's poker. Yeah.
I paid attention, see?
I didn't.
And what are some of the weird things that you do outside of your job that you feel help you with your job? You mentioned puzzling, maybe that's something, I don't know.
Oh, well, the number one thing that helps with my job is exercising. Easily. I do a lot of kickboxing and boxing, and like, just because the hours end up being so crazy, I need to be able to be not only there, but also energetic. And you can't live this lifestyle of being in front of a computer for 14 hours a day and have energy to then also pick up the phone at 4 o'clock in the morning and go over to the studio. It's just not going to happen. So, and being able to be sharp and to take breaks and things like that, like exercising has definitely been the number one thing. I would say outside of that, everything that I do kind of informs me as a human being. So I don't think that it's specifically like, oh, if you go out and play poker, you will become a better musician. Like, I don't think that's the case. But when I go out and play poker, it forces me to think dimensionally and also to read people, which is really helpful when I'm setting up negotiations or trying to figure out, what is this person really asking me for? What is this person really entailing? Because sometimes they don't even know. So there's definitely things that I do that inform my business acumen or my mixing, but I feel like, I think it was Dave Pensato was saying that he was like super into photography and he uses that to inform his mixing. Well, it's like, cool. I don't do photography. So that doesn't inform my mixing, but it informs his. So it's really just about sort of drawing the relationships of what you do back into the other things you do.
Yeah, that is super fascinating. It makes a lot of sense, actually. Like when I was learning first about Photoshop and using the software correctly, a lot of things just really clicked instantly. And if you learn about lighting for film as well, like the lighting that I do for my YouTube show, I was really surprised by how many things kind of where you get a crossover, even in the terminology between that and making or mixing music. So, for example, one of the things you do in lighting is you use a backlight to kind of get that shine on your on the back of your head or hair. Not in my case, but sometimes called a hair light as well, or a rim light. And that really gives you nice separation against the background, which is typically a little bit less bright. And you have the same thing in mixing as well, that you maybe add a little bit of a high boost to the vocals so that they stand out a little bit more, whereas the background typically sounds a little bit duller, like with a little bit less highs. There's mixing engineers who really just take out a lot of the highs from the music, and the vocal is the only thing that sits on top with the highs, essentially.
But yeah, no, I mean that's true, but at the same time, I would say it's as true as it isn't true. Like, yes, when things are more well lit, then it allows you to see them more clearly and they push to the foreground, but you can also roll off top end and just make something louder. And if you want to talk about like what it sounds like when somebody's right next to your ear, you actually don't hear as much top end. You hear more lower mids. So it really depends on the affect of what you're going for. As a general rule of thumb, yes, if you want something to stand forward, you make it brighter until you turn it down too much, and then it just starts to sound thin. And that's a different affect. So, there are correlations that can be drawn, but don't overshoot
Yeah.
the meaning of it.
Cool. Now, what's the best way to learn what you do?
The best way to learn what I do, I think that's the answer. The answer is the same thing for everything, which is to freaking do it.
Just do it.
Just start doing it. The best way to do it is to, well, it depends on which aspects we're talking about. If we're talking about the recording side of things, then I would say the best thing that you can do is just literally go up to every human musician you can find and bat them over the head with the idea that you are going to stick microphones in front of them until good things happen. And that's how you learn how to record. And then, when it comes time to mix, and you go around either what you've recorded or the internet or whatever it is, and you just download as many track outs to songs that you can, and you just start doing it, and you start comparing your results, and you start trying to do these things. What I do on the educational side is not meant to make somebody an amazing mixer, because I think anybody that's promising that if you watch this course or you read this book or whatever it might be, you are going to be amazing at your craft. If that were simply the case, then I would probably be getting paid more as an educator, for one. And for two, literally, there would be no reason to ever hire a mixer because everybody would be good at it. What I'm hoping to do is to give people direction so that, a 10-year process becomes a 4 or 5-year process. It still requires a process. It's just how many years do you want to spend doing it? Do you want to be doing it aimlessly, or do you want to be doing it with ideas of what to go for and how things work? So I would say the best way to do it is supplementary educational information, like the stuff that you provide and I provide, is right alongside of practice, and also practice.
And lastly, one more thing that is one of my favorite questions from one of my favorite books, Tribe of Mentors. I don't know if have you heard of that book by Tim Ferriss?
Nope.
So it's basically a book where Tim Ferriss has written, I think it's 11 questions or something like that, and he asks people from around the world, celebrities or successful people, the same 11 questions, and they answer those 11 questions. One of my favorite questions from that list is, what would you put on a billboard? In other words, what's a saying or a mindset or something that you want people to everywhere around the world to understand and to get, or maybe specifically in the music industry?
Oh, I've got a good. I call them fortune cookies, and I've got a
Great.
few of them. I mean, I said one before, which is that success is not a finish line; it's something you perpetuate. I think that's extremely important. There's another one that's targeted a little bit more specifically to what it means to be an artist or to be the producer, and that is that you need to be confident enough to put your foot down when you're right, humble enough to accept when somebody else is right, and wise enough to be able to tell the difference. 'Cause I think a lot of artists tend to struggle with that negotiation. So that's one that I say a lot when I'm teaching classes. There's probably, I mean, I'm just fountains of wisdom, just pouring wisdom out all of the time. Like basically, I'm 72% water and like 28% wisdom. So
The wisdom fountain. Yeah,
yeah.
I like that.
So I mean, no, I mean, I can't think of any other. The funny thing is, when I read the little prompt you sent me, I thought you said something about getting on Billboard, and I was like, well, I've been on Billboard.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
the main one is just to remember that success is a ladder that just goes on infinitely, and you keep climbing. There's never a finish line, really.
And one last question. Other than luck and hard work, obviously, oop, that was my glass. Other than luck and hard work, what do you attribute your successes to?
I mean, I would say people. That's the third part of that equation. It's like people say that it's when preparation meets opportunity, that's the secret to success. It's like, yeah, but we're missing a very important third component, and that is other people. So I can actually trace my line of success to very specific individual people that I worked hard to work with. And there's a whole lot of people around them that I don't remember that I also worked hard to work with that fell off the face of the map. And that's okay because the few people that really have mattered in my life, they're the ones who have gotten me to where I'm going. And I can even give you a very specific example with specific names. I started working with my friend Raheem Megaran. I mentioned him once before. And I worked with him for free. This was back in the early 2000s. He introduced me to a guy named Shamik, who was a producer, a junior producer over at a company called Matrax at the time. I stayed in contact with him. Through the course of those years, I built up my chops working with someone named Mark Marshall and Denise Barbarita. And then I came back. I linked up with Shamik again. We've been working together since 2008 or 9. Again, nobody here has paid me really along this line. And then Shamik, and because he was out doing his thing and networking and building his team and pushing his brand, he was able to introduce me to a guy named Hero. Hero, in turn, introduced me to Akon, and that all these introductions is what's led me to where I am now. But it's funny because I can trace it back to like 5 people.
Yeah.
So it's really important that, you know, I think in the internet culture, this one I cannot stress enough. If people don't take anything else from anything that I've said, the problem with internet culture is that while it seems like it's ubiquitous, it's actually insulary. And you aren't really meeting people. You're meeting pictures of people. It's not the same. Success is built on real life interaction. It still is. You can do wonderful things on the internet. The internet is a part of that equation. It is a good way to introduce. It's a good way to just sort of get the ball rolling. But real life interaction is where real things happen, and you need to meet real people in order to do it. So luck, hard work, and real people. That's the triumvirate.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good point. Cool. And that concludes our little interview. Thank you so much, Matt, for joining me and answering my questions so diligently.
It was a pleasure. I'm really glad to be on here with you. So I love your channel and you're kicking ass. And, you know, I hope that people who are fans of mine will become fans of yours, because the songwriting, all the mixing in the world is not going to save the song. You got to get the song first. Then come over to my channel and we'll get the mix, okay?
Perfect. And vice versa. Absolutely. I mean, I found out about you first when I saw your pro audio files on YouTube, and I really loved everything that you put out. So I'm a big fan of your channel as well. I haven't mentioned that yet, but I really am. So everyone who hasn't subscribed to that channel yet, it's the pro audio files on YouTube, right?
Correct.
That's the name of the channel, guys. Everyone subscribe. I'll see you next time. Cheers.
See